Are you a business owner stuck in fear, doubt, and worry about what the marketplace will look like in the future? Then this show is for you. Strap on your seatbelt and get ready to disrupt and innovate. Here's your host, Lisa Levy.
Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Steve Anderson, a visionary in the realm of risk, growth, and business strategy. Steve's journey has been defined by challenging conventional wisdom around risk, inspired by none other than Jeff Bezos himself. In his seminal work, The Bezos Letters, 14 Principles to Grow Your Business Like Amazon redefines how businesses perceive risk, not as a deterrent, but as a catalyst for growth. In his exploration of Amazon's meteoric rise, Steve unveils the power of intentional risk-taking. Unlike random chance, deliberate risk management underpins Amazon's success, anchored in a culture of experimentation and innovation. Steve believes that understanding and adopting this mindset are crucial for businesses aiming to achieve transformational results. Today, we'll have Steve share his insights into cultivating a risk and growth mindset, empowering businesses to thrive in an era of uncertainty and opportunity. It's a journey into the heart of strategic risk management, where innovation meets possibility, where businesses dare to dream bigger. Audience, I think you know why Steve is here with me. Steve, welcome to this conversation.
Lisa, thanks so much for having me. I look forward to it.
I am so excited to have this conversation, right? The things that you latched onto, experimentation, driving innovation, all of these things are so critical to business owners and what we need to do to grow and scale and achieve what we're looking for. Tell the audience a little bit about your journey, how you got to the point in time where you're having these conversations and why they're important right now.
So condensed, I've been part of the insurance industry virtually my whole career. Early on selling insurance, and then later helping insurance agencies actually use and understand technology. I've been doing that for 30-ish years. And that really is what started me thinking about this whole idea of risk. Obviously, insurance, right? We're about reducing risk, transferring risk, mitigating risk, not taking risk. And I started asking, because technology continues to develop so rapidly, is the biggest risk businesses face actually not taking enough risk? And so that's what I started, that kernel of a thought, basically, and then started looking at companies that had once been very successful and are literally gone, and companies that have been successful and continue to be successful, and tried to start understanding what's the difference. Came across Amazon. I say now kind of, yeah, no big, it was a, what am I trying to say? Looking back on it at the time, it was like, Amazon, well, they continue to be successful. I'm interested. So I came across the letters to shareholders that Jeff Bezos wrote and took them as an entire, not just one letter at a time, but actually read them through and realized there were threads throughout those letters. And shareholder letters often are boring, tout the company and all the things they've done well. Bezos did that to some degree, but he did more of how he grew Amazon and what Amazon did and the mindset, et cetera. And that's what really intrigued me. And so I started kind of writing about and thinking about and talking to people about some of those threads. Fortunately, my wife is in the book business, and through some conversations, she said, this is a book. And that started a journey of actually writing the book, which is a whole nother, probably longer conversation, but it was published, has had some success. So I'm very grateful for that.
Well, and one of the things that's interesting, right, you mentioned, right, there are names of companies that we would know that are no longer around. I'll throw out Kodak, I'll throw out TWA, I'll throw out BlackBerry, right?
Blockbuster, Sears, Kmart. Right? I mean, right, all of these companies that, again, as I said, were once really successful and then took a while for some of them, but gone, not around anymore.
And the connection between that and risk appetite is an interesting conversation to have. And Amazon, I think, becomes a really interesting case study because it was a big and initial disruptor. And the time period that you looked at, what you wrote about and what Bezos created was truly disruptive and innovative. And now it's the big guy sitting up top.
Mhm.
And what happens next?
So that is a great question, obviously. And, Bezos addressed that kind of throughout. So his first letter was written in 1997. They went public that year. CEO shareholder letter is a common thing that's done. And he said several things in that letter, kind of set the groundwork for what Amazon would be doing in the future. One section was on long-term thinking. And he basically said, we will make decisions based on long-term benefit, not quarterly short-term profit, which goes against everything a public company is supposed to do.
Right.
The other thing he said was that we will obsess over customers. And we could talk about that a little bit more because it's a really interesting concept and a really interesting word he chose. And then the third was, in order for us to be successful, we're going to have the best employees. And so we talked about what it's going to be like to work at Amazon. And kind of infused in that very first letter was this idea of risk-taking, experimentation, invention, and innovation. And so it started really early. And one of the phrases he used in that letter that he used in almost every other letter was, it's day one for the internet. Remember, this is 97, so it really was. And for Amazon.com, if we execute well. And kind of how that morphed over the next couple of years is this like a thought or mindset. It's always day one. And it really is a mindset at Amazon that every day you come into work, think of it as your first day in business. The excitement, the focus, the dealing with customers and helping them and creating things for them. And he closed every single letter subsequent with some form of, it's still day one, it's always day one. Even in 2019 letter, which came out in early 2020, he said that even with all of the problems, alluding to COVID, et cetera, it's still day one. So that's a longer answer to your question, what's next? I think as long as Amazon keeps that mindset and that culture, then they will keep experimenting, inventing, innovating, and growing.
One of the pieces, and we've got so much to play with in this conversation, Steve, but one of the pieces in the thread, first one I want to pull is like that, the idea of we're focused on long-term benefit.
Mhm.
How that connects to risk management in my mind and in the work that I do, right? If you are managing to the long term, risk is somewhat less scary, right? The risk of the next 90 days, the risk of the next 180 days, right? Things can do a lot, but when you're talking about 10 years, 5 years, right? Those risk issues become far less volatile because they curve over time. And so that mindset for an entrepreneur today is really important to think long term, right? And it is then becomes about making decisions for taking calculated risk and knowing what it means.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I always want to emphasize, because my first principle is encourage successful failure. And I always want to emphasize this isn't stupid failure. In fact, Amazon has an intolerance for incompetence. So it's strategic, and I call him the master of risk because it's strategic, it's thoughtful. You work at not failing.
Yes.
And when you do, it's not going to kill the company because you've taken steps before that. It's what I call protecting the downside. and you're still going to fail. And if you have a long-term mindset, then you could have a lot of failures to getting to the one that is the big bet, right? That is the thing that's going to propel you forward. And I'm paraphrasing now, I can't quote it, but he says, that most people won't suffer the failures to get to the big success that's required. And most of the time, those failures are small and the big bet is big, right? So it more than compensates for a lot of failures along the way.
Yeah, in American culture, we have a real problem with the word failure.
Mhm.
I have had this conversation with so many people, and there's a camp out there who say, we will not even talk about failure. A coach of a professional team does not plan to go out on the field and fail. They plan to go out and they win. You plan to win. And it's like, yeah, but when you're on the practice field, things go sideways. And during a game, things go sideways. And so, yes, we have those opportunities where, trying to soften the language, right? We have unexpected outcomes. We have learning opportunities. We have all of these things that really are fundamentally, they're failures. And it's what we do next that matters.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
and I think that, again, you've done a great job of setting up that idea that if everything went exactly according to plan all the time, we, one, would not be taking enough risk, and the big outcome would never happen because we weren't thinking big enough.
Yeah, totally agree. And I tell the story in the book of the Apollo 13 mission. And again, I won't go into great depth into it, but kind of speaking to what you just said, there's a famous line, and I'm drawing a blank on who the actor was playing, but the mission control person at NASA, that failure is not an option. Well, failure is always an option. And I think that is an example of what you're talking about now. And I connect that Apollo 13 success. I call that a successful failure. In fact, that's exactly where the phrase came from. But that was built on a massive failure on Apollo 1 when 3 astronauts were killed in a fire. And NASA had to completely retool. Massive failure that allowed them to retool, think differently, work the problem, and get the Apollo 13 3 astronauts back safely.
And, one of the things that statement in there that's so impactful, work the problem.
Mhm.
Right? Critical thinking, learning, applying, experimenting. These are all aspects of running a business that will grow and scale. If anybody truly believes that they have all the answers, they know exactly what to do, how to do it, and that they're going to get exactly what they're going after, I wish them the best of luck.
They're in for disappointment.
I wish them the best of luck, but I've
Yep.
never seen it happen that flawlessly. And right, the flaws are failures.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the other pieces that you highlighted from kind of the initial threads that Bezos put out there was, we are going to obsess about our customer.
Mhm.
And that language is very intentional and very specific. In my world, I talk about, we want to put our clients, our customers at the center of our universe. I made it sound prettier, but it's the same idea. Why is that so critical? And why was that such a key differentiator for what Amazon did and how it was so disparate and why it's so critical?
So every company knows they need to take care of customers if they're going to stay in business. But to what degree are you willing to go? I mean, I think that's kind of the core idea. And obsess is such an interesting word because it has positive and negative connotations, right? You're too obsessed with something, right? We use that as a negative. But in Amazon's case, and Bezos specifically, they can't be too obsessed over customers. And so how that translates is, and some other phrases that kind of come out of that thought is working backwards from the customer, inventing on behalf of the customer, right? And so knowing customers' wants, needs, and desires so deeply that they are able to actually step in their shoes and see where problems are so they can create solutions and remove friction. I mean, a really simple thing early on in the internet. If people remember back then, buying something online was actually hard, a lot of friction, because people, they had to put all their information, their shipping, their credit card, every time they wanted to buy. Well, Amazon invented one-click shopping to the point that they had a patent on it for 17 years, and no one else could do it. Apple licensed their one-click shopping patent to use on their site. Barnes and Noble tried to duplicate it. Amazon sued them and won. I mean, so that tiny little example that we don't even think about anymore today. Of course, we can store our stuff online, right?
Yeah.
But back then, that was not the case. And so, again, looking at the customer lens and figuring out how can we make that customer's life easier? And I call it friction, right? And as a business owner, do you know where your customers experience friction? I would say most of the time you don't, because you don't actually, you assume what's happening. You don't know what's happening. And one of the great ways to do that is a secret shopper. Send a friend or somebody that doesn't know the business and have them record, make notes, whatever, of their experience and where they ran into problems. And then as the company, go in and fix those points. That's the idea behind obsessing over customers, every little detail.
Yeah. And I want to highlight to the audience, don't miss the key point that Steve made. You may assume you know what your customers experience, and I will say 80% of the time you are absolutely wrong. Until you actually gather real intelligence and understand secret shopper, if it's a shopping experience, is a fantastic way to do that. But if you really believe that you know, the more adamantly you believe, if you don't have this intelligence, the more adamantly I will tell you, I think that you're wrong. And it makes a difference. And this is right. These are those differences that are about that impair growth and scale.
Yeah.
We have gone through the pandemic. We are out of, depending on language and where you are and how your business operates, through this, right? But that was a time of tremendous uncertainty for everybody. Everything about how we do business sort of changed in an instant. We went to online interactions versus in-person meetings and all of these things that have happened. From where you sit with the logic and the school of thought that you bring out and you're sharing, looking to the future, what are some of the things that we have to look forward to that are innovative and disruptive and that are going to make an impact in our business world?
Well, I sort of hate to even say it, but generative AI, and everybody's talking about it, and right, the hype cycle and all of that. But I am in the camp. One, I'm not afraid of it. I don't believe silicon computers can become people. So I'm just not worried about. I think it's a tool, and I think that's what you have to understand. I actually think, used properly, it enhances the human connection, not detracts from it. I think it enhances it augments employees. So I'm actually quite optimistic about what is going to happen with that and how it's continuing to develop, and actually will continue to help us engage, me, you, with others in a different way. So that's pretty exciting. And part of what's interesting to me, let me make this connection. So 2016, again, this Bezos writes about this in his shareholder letter. 2016, he was at an all hands meeting, couple thousand employees in Seattle, quarterly common thing, went through, here's what's going on with the company, here's what we're focused on, here's what we see coming, and opened it up for Q&A at the end. Employees would write their questions down. He had some cards. looked at a card and the question, he kind of chuckled and said, Jeff, what does day 2 look like? So I already mentioned day 1. What does day 2 look like? And he chuckled and said, I think I know the answer to this. Day 2 is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. That's why it's always day 1. And the crowd broke out into applause. In writing about that in his letter, he shared that story. And he said, I'm actually more interested in how you fend off day 2. And he had 4 things. I'll do them real quick. Customer obsession, we talked about. A skeptical view of proxies. Now, for him, a proxy is a process or procedure that no longer serves the customer. So it's somewhat tied, but it's not something that we've always done that we're not going to change. It's something you've always done and probably needs to change because customers change. Third is eager adoption of external trends. And he actually referenced in 2016 machine learning as one of those trends. Which I think is really interesting. And then the last one is high velocity decision making. What happens as a business gets bigger, as they scale, is they add layers of bureaucracy. Be that a supervisor, be that division, VP, whatever it is. And all that does is slow down growth because now you have to go through multiple layers. So those 4 things are what he calls defenses against a day 2 mindset. And kind of your question you asked at the beginning was, are they, how are they going to continue? I think understanding some of those dynamics and continuing to be aware of it is probably a first step in keeping them from shifting into a day 2 type company and staying a day 1.
And it will be really interesting to see over a little bit more time with new leadership what actually happens, right?
Exactly.
Because that succession transition is always risky.
Risky, hard, difficult.
Yes.
And do you Bezos came up with this. Will Andy Jassy be able to continue it with the same passion that Bezos has? So far, we'll see. Seems okay, but you're right. It'll be interesting to watch.
It'll be interesting to watch over time because as much as nobody wants to say that, success is tied to an individual, there is an energy, a momentum, a something that the right individuals bring. And when they step away, Bezos would be an example. For the life of me, I just lost my train of thought, but the former CEO of T-Mobile, when he stepped away, I call that a senior moment, right? But
yes,
right, the Pam shuffle on, slow cooker Sunday, he was very present. He was very out in the public, and he created the Uncarrier. And why I can't think of his name right now is really embarrassing. But this is
I don't know it, so I can't
in the
remember it either.
moment.
Yeah.
But right, and he stepped away, and in my T-Mobile is a telephony character, cell carrier like all of the others, and all of that innovation and disruption sort of died on the vine. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Steve, if this conversation has piqued the curiosity and interest of our listeners, what is the best way for them to find you and find more?
So, the book that I wrote, The Bezos Letters, is available on Amazon. I assume, right? So certainly go there, and if you read it and like it, leave a review. That's how you can help me. The book website is thebezosletters.com, and there's some additional information there, that might be helpful as you're reading through the book. And then my main platform is LinkedIn, and so I have a pretty big presence there. So Steve Anderson Insurance or Steve Anderson Bezos, search. You should be able to find me. If you do, and want to connect, let me know you listen to the podcast. I'll be happy to.
And for the audience members, all of those links will be in the show notes. So it is easy. It's a one-click opportunity to find Steve. Audience, we had a great conversation today. The number one rule in all of this, it's always day 1 with our business. Do everything we can to fend off day 2, that stasis, which leads to the decline, which happens to more businesses than not. And so embrace risk as a strategic tool and know that calculated risk is what actually gets you to the big wins. Thank you for joining us today. You know the rules. Don't get left behind. Join me next time.
That's it for today's episode of Disrupt and Innovate. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show.